This video lecture will cover the major events in the process of the British colonization of India during the period from 1830 to 1860. During the 1800s, England was in competition with France, Spain, Germany, and Italy, along with several other European countries, in efforts to colonize the yet undiscovered and unexplored areas of Africa and Asia that had been largely ignored during the first age of imperialism, when Europeans explored and colonized North and South America. Through their efforts, England became the most successful colonizer during this period, and India came to be known as the crown jewel of the new British Empire because of its value in both goods and services that it was able to provide to England and its merchants. The initial encounters between the British and the Indian people resulted in the early 1800s as a result of the efforts of the British East India Trading Company. This organization went to India with two goals. The first and most important goal was to make money through the trade of tea, cotton, and other goods that were native to India and that could be brought back to Europe and sold for a substantial profit due to their scarcity in England. In addition, the East India Trading Company and its merchants also hoped to change the Indian religion, culture, and society to match that of England. During this time, the British viewed their culture as superior to many other cultures in the world and thought that by getting the Indian people to change their way of life to match that of the British, it would make it easier for them to trade and make a profit, which was their primary goal. The actions of the British East India Trading Company and its merchants caused a variety of incidents of discontent among the Indian people. There were three specific actions and rules that were instituted by the British East India Trading Company and the British Navy that caused the Indian people to become unhappy with the British during the 1850s. The first was that the British Navy required young Indian men to serve as sepoys, or soldiers in the British Navy. In the early days, these sepoys served throughout India, but as colonization went on and the British sought to expand their empire, they started to force these sepoys to serve overseas, helping them colonize other areas of the world outside of India. Secondly, the British, once they began to control Indian territory, created new laws, one of which allowed Indian women to get remarried after the death of their husband. This came as a shock to some Indians because, based on their religion, some Indians believed that a woman was supposed to be loyal to her husband and follow him into death by jumping into his funeral pyre and burning to death along with his cremated body. While this was not something all Indians believed, there was a segment of the population that found this change to be offensive. Third and finally, the soldiers that had been forced to join the British Navy were required to load their rifles by shoving cartridges greased with animal fat down the barrel of their rifle. The animal fat that was used to grease the bullets often came from either cows or pigs, two animals which played an important role in the native Indian religion, and the use of the fat from these animals was seen as a violation of the Indian religion. When combined, these three actions showed a significant level of disrespect towards the Indian culture and forced some Indian people to violate their native Hindu and Muslim religions. The combination of all three of these, along with the way Indians had been treated by the British, led to the most important event in the colonization of India, an event known as the Sepoy Rebellion. The Sepoy Rebellion lasted from 1857 to 1859. The rebellion began when soldiers who refused to load their weapons and follow the orders of British officers were sent home without the pay they were supposed to receive for their service in the British military. When they failed to receive their pay, sepoys rebelled and attacked their British officers. In many instances, officers were killed. After attacking and killing the British officers, the sepoys also turned their anger on innocent British women and children who were living in India and killed them as well. In response to this violence, the British military was brought in to protect and defend British citizens in India as part of the Navy and East India Trading Company, and the British military went about burning villages and massacring thousands of innocent Indians in response to the actions of the sepoys. What these 2 years showed was that India needed to be controlled by the British in order for it to be a successful colony. And so, as a result of the rebellion, the East India Trading Company was eliminated, and England took direct control of India, ruling it through the actions and laws passed by the English Parliament. Once they did this, India was officially a British colony and was no longer just a place where the British went to trade. Once India had been claimed and established as an official colony, the British sent more troops to India, taking direct control of India and its people's lives in an effort to protect the interests and lives of the British government and British citizens living in India. Once India became a colony of England, there were a variety of changes that occurred throughout the country. Some of these changes were negative and included the unequal or unfair treatment and opportunities for Indians compared to the British. In many cases, Indians were forced to grow cash crops such as cotton and poppies, which would be used for the production of clothes and for opium, instead of growing food or other things that were useful to the Indian population. The British also cut down many acres of Indian land and forest in order to create farms and grow these cash crops. When combined, these resulted in a famine or a lack of food for many Indians, making their life more difficult. While there were a variety of problems in colonial India, England did make a number of investments in the country that led to improvements and benefits for the Indian people. The British spent millions of dollars building roads and railroads to improve the Indian infrastructure and to promote the trade and movement of troops, and they also changed a number of laws benefiting Indians by getting rid of their traditional caste systems and making people more equal throughout the country. In some cases, Indians who were cooperative and sought to trade with the British were able to do so and become wealthy. And the wealthy and privileged people of India who worked with the British often had the opportunity to get an education and an important government job in India, something many Indian citizens did not have the option to do. Collectively, these changes brought a new way of life and a different approach to living in India. India would remain a colony of England until it gained its independence following World War II in 1947. The most important factor in India gaining its independence were the actions of a man named Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi was born on October 2, 1869, and spent much of his life resisting the British through peaceful methods. Gandhi promoted the refusing to buy British goods. He himself went on hunger strikes, where he refused to eat, and organized other peaceful protests, all in efforts to draw attention to the British actions in India and the way the British were treating the Indian people. His efforts promoted a strong sense of nationalism among Indians and a sense of pride in their country that resulted in them ultimately petitioning for and gaining their independence following the conclusion of World War II. Gandhi was assassinated on January 30th, 1948, as a result of his actions and was killed by an Indian who disagreed with his approach to trying to gain their independence and because of religious differences. As a whole, England's colonization of India resulted in dramatic changes. The country was modernized, the country developed new forms of culture and new ways of life, but in many cases these things were often forced upon the Indian people and benefited a smaller number of Indians than it did the British who had taken over the country.